Welcome back into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing. We're like Nico Harrison. We have decided no one can record anything that happens for the next hour. On today's episode, the clock is ticking on UFC and ESPN. This could be the end of sports on TV. But first, a perfect Masters. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That's Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. Back in the third chair is Drew Lerner, a fellow editor at Awful Announcing. We got a lot to dig into, guys. We'll start with golf, a sport that I am 100% an expert on. Rory McIlroy, he won it. He finally did the damn thing. One-hole playoff. Very sensational, emotional, down-to-the-wire ending that couldn't have been scripted any better. Completes the career Grand Slam and atones for his mistakes a decade ago. Just a storybook ending, and CBS, I think, was right there to give it to him. So let's just start with what you wrote coming off of that finish at Augusta, Drew, which was really positive and crediting the job that CBS did delivering us that story, delivering Rory the story. What did you think of how it all came together?
Yeah, I thought it was brilliantly done by CBS. I thought going into the final round on Sunday, obviously it was shaping up to be a bit of like an Ali Frazier type deal, Rory versus Bryson. And that was the storyline going in. But several holes, maybe 5-6 holes into the golf tournament, it shook out in a way that, Bryson kind of fell off and it became, Rory's, it became very well within Rory's grasp to win this tournament, right? But going in, I thought no matter what happened, whether Rory shoots an 80 or a 60, that the story of the day was going to be Rory McIlroy, right? It's going to be if he wins or loses. Doesn't matter if Bryson wins. Doesn't matter if Justin Rose wins. The main character here is Rory McIlroy. And I thought CBS did a brilliant job conveying that, right? They really never let Rory's story go. And of course, like, he was leading the golf tournament for most of the day, right? So this is not like something that is, just an insane like decision on CBS's part. Yeah. Of course, they're going to follow Rory all the way through, but for him to be, really the heartbeat of a 5-hour broadcast, like CBS decided to do it, I think that was kind of the magic of Sunday.
What did you think, Ben? Did you watch?
I did. Yeah. Look, I got my Masters hat on.
That
my mother-in-law got me 6 years ago when she went to the Masters, because you can only buy Masters stuff at the Masters or on eBay. But yeah, I mean, like, my pessimistic, skeptical instinct was to like criticize CBS for being too syrupy. And I think Jim Nantz is, pretty syrupy in terms of a play-by-play guy. But this was a syrupy moment. Like, this was like, if you were going to draft the top Masters storyline heading into this weekend, especially, with the improbable Tiger comeback being off the board with him not participating in it, like, this would have been one. And like, not only would it be this, it would be him going against a live guy, maybe him going against like the most adversarial live guy, him having a lead and then choking and then regaining it and then choking again, like in the most epic of fashions, and then pulling it off. Like, it almost felt like too scripted. Obviously that wasn't the case, but yeah, I mean, I think when you factor that in and then factor in, like I said, like the syrupy nature of CBS and of Jim Nantz, like, it did match. It did meet the moment, and it did. This is like what people like about the Masters. I consumed a lot of my Masters coverage, and you might have been the same way, Brendon, came from Bill Simmons podcasts where him and his buddies were at the Masters. Oh, I thought they were delightful. I know they were polarizing.
I can't even criticize it because I didn't take in a second. So I'm not even panning it. I'm just telling you I skipped them.
I thought they were awesome. Oh, I know they were very polarizing on the Bill Simmons subreddit, which you and I frequent, but I thought that if I had one criticism of the sports guy, it would be like, it felt like every 5 minutes he was just like, man, the Masters is awesome. Man, I love the Masters. But that's like, that's kind of what the Masters is. The Masters is like a self-celebration of the Masters. And this was a moment that fed into all of that. So I had no issue with it. I thought it was perfect.
Yeah. And not only was it that, what the Masters brings every year in that regard. But this is the completion of a 10, 11-year story arc with Rory McIlroy's career, right? We're talking about a guy who has had more heartbreak in his major championship career than the best of them, right? You go back to 3 years ago to the 150th Open Championship at St. Andrews, like where he is hitting every green, plays a completely ABC round of golf, but literally can't roll in a putt. And Cam Smith, takes it from him in the last few holes and goes and joins Live 2 weeks later. And this is at the height of that drama. And then last year at the U.S. Open, everyone knows what happens with Bryson DeChambeau, stealing it from him again, missing a 3-footer on 18. And the parallels between some of those rounds and what happened on Sunday, where Rory really could not get it together, right? He would have moments of brilliance and then moments of complete, you did not know what was happening. Specifically that shot at 13, where he missed his line by 25 yards and chipped it into Rae's Creek. I mean, this had all of the drama that you could ever want. And as a golf fan myself, as I'm sure many people that listen to this show have figured out by now, this is like every shot you were living and dying with what happened to Rory. There's like a pit in your stomach from the first hole when he double bogeys and then he follows it up with a bogey on 2, and all of a sudden he's blown his lead and he's down to Bryson. I mean, the amount of like indigestion I had for that 5 hours, and then culminating with like probably the biggest freaking headache of my life when he finally rolled in the putt to win the playoff. It's like I didn't even enjoy a second of the round because of how ridiculous some of his shots were. It was just pure stress. And I think, CBS did a great job kind of just conveying that, because this is what the vast majority of golf fans cared about.
Let me ask you this. I think this will get to something Brendon wants to get to, is like how many golfers could elicit this? Because it like one thing, Ryan Russillo was talking about this on one of the Bill Simmons podcasts, kind of making fun of golf fans. Like they just like everybody. It's like everybody's their guy, but it seems like Rory really is their guy. Like my family group chat, you would have thought like the Cleveland Browns were in the AFC title game, the way it was popping off on Sunday afternoon. And I do think there is something to the idea that Rory is one of the few guys on the tour with a backstory that isn't just that he's great. Like I love Scotty Scheffler. I think Scotty Scheffler's awesome. Scotty Scheffler's whole thing is just that he's great. Like, yeah, he's a family guy. He got arrested a year ago, whatever. Like Scotty, like Rory, we have like, he was great. And then he fell off for like a decade. Didn't even seem like he was ever going to get it back. And now all of a sudden he's like back on top of the golf world with whatever's happened here at the age of 35. One, like, is there anybody else who could elicit this? And then 2, to get to like what I think you want to get to, Brendon, like what does golf need in terms of its personalities and its backstories? Because it feels like that is a part of what the sport is missing post Tiger, and in this live era where like all these guys who we did have this equity with, like aren't even playing on the PGA Tour.
Yeah. Well, Rory has what Rory has going for him is that golf fans have seen him grow up, right? He was a child prodigy. They showed the video of him chipping in his, living room a million times on the broadcast Sunday. Golf fans have known about Rory for decades now. And so we've seen all of his triumphs and all of his tribulations. And the other aspect, you say he's fallen off over the last 10 years. Yeah, that's true in the major championships. But over that same 10-year span, he's probably been, honestly, I don't even think it's debatable. He's been the best golfer in the world, right? He's won multiple tour championships. He's won the Players. Like, he is one of the best golfers year in, year out, and has shown more consistency than practically anyone else on tour, yet he hasn't been able to break through. So I think that was another part of the reason why this story resonated with us. And he's always worn his emotions on his sleeve, right? He's very, he's given the media more access than I think most golfers. Kind of tend to be pretty insular. This has been a big discussion around the tour this year. How much media access you're going to, give or get from these players. And Rory has always, every step of the way been very willing to talk to the media. So I think that all plays a role in why this story felt so, there's such visceral reactions coming from people when he hit a bad shot, and why it was so compelling to, the everyday golf fan.
Is there any, this was like the story that was kind of lingering in the background. I feel like I know the Masters have an outsized importance to like the average sports fan, and that's part of why it was such a big one. Obviously, it was the one that Rory hadn't had in addition to just his history at the tournament and everything else. But what's the next big thing in golf here? Like that's kind of a question that I had, because I've been desperate to find a time to mock this Ringer Sports Events of the Century list. They put the Tiger champion. They put the Tiger Masters win in 2019 as the 17th best one. That's absurd. There's like 4 NFL moments I don't even care about ahead of it. So like that's
especially surprising because Bill Simmons once claimed after that tournament Tiger Woods as one of his teams. Like he claimed Tiger Woods as like a Boston sports team for him. So that's surprising to me.
Well, one of the NFL moments I don't care about was the Malcolm Butler interception. That was not a better sports moment than Tiger Woods winning the Masters. I can go ahead and tell you that right now. We don't need to. Oh no, okay. Hold on. I have it wrong. That was seventh, and then 17th was a different Tiger moment.
Okay.
But either way, that was like a big moment. This is another one. But like, what kind of comes? What comes next here, Drew? Like, what are golf fans interested in, or like, what's the next thing that CBS production crews are going to be gearing up to follow like a hawk all throughout Saturday and Sunday of some tournament?
Yeah, well, you're right. Like, nothing is really going to compare to what happened on Sunday, at least for quite some time, until maybe there's some new storylines that have some time to develop. But I look at 2 guys that are kind of, going to be carrying the torch in terms of major championship storylines for the next few years. I think number one is, Bryson DeChambeau. There's a pretty big, I would say, dividing line between younger golf fans and then golf fans that are, more our age in our generation that, have come up with Rory being their favorite golfer. Bryson is kind of the champion of the younger golf fan. He has all of the YouTube, credentials that might appeal to younger audiences. He plays it up well on social media. He's always given the patrons at Augusta National or the fans at any other tournament high fives. He's kind of the people's player. I don't know if that really has the broad-based appeal that a Rory win would have. When we're talking about golf, we're usually talking about that audience that is over 25 or 30 years old. So when you're talking about CBS's audience last Sunday, the majority of them are going to resonate more with Rory than with Bryson. But give it a few years, that could be different. The other guy I look to is Jordan Spieth, right? He's kind of in that Rory spot right now, where he is yet to win a major in the last, I don't know, probably close to 10 years now, maybe 10. But his game has been so up and down that no one's really sure if he's going to be able to break through again. But that's really the next like kind of similar story to Rory, especially given that Spieth is like one of the few true needle movers in the game of golf. He was anointed as kind of that next Tiger in 2015 when he went and won the Masters. And he hasn't really lived up to that billing since. So if he can find his game, I think Jordan Spieth would be the next one to look at.
Okay, so as Ben hinted at, the last thing I want to hit is you mentioned like going into Sunday, it was obvious at that point, just given the leaderboard, that this Bryson Rory thing was going to be part of the story, and Bryson ends up falling off by the time we get to the late afternoon. But he wasn't the story at all Thursday, Friday. And that was something we covered at Awful Announcing, where he wasn't, in one of these featured groups that's, hole by hole followed on television. And, you could get conspiratorial about that and say that they're trying to hide him because he's a live guy, and, his remarks publicly and kind of the character he's built up, like you said, Drew, or just a missed opportunity. Just they overlooked it and didn't prioritize getting a famous person who happens to play golf on TV as much as possible. But there was this article about this whole dynamic over at The Athletic by Gabby Hertzig that I thought was really good. And she dug into some of the things that have held golf back in terms of embracing this, aside from the kind of big picture stuff I just laid out, where they're very prickly about the rights that they have with different courses and different networks, and just a little bit, I mean, behind the times, obviously, but almost like stubbornly, technically refusing to adapt the traditions and kind of, way that their business operates in order to bring this audience in, even though they have somebody, not the PGA, of course, but when he plays in these major tournaments, they have him in the mix here with this built-in audience. And he's not the only one, Bryson. So where do you think this is headed? Do you think they're just going to kind of be separate audiences, and then these major tournaments, it's just kind of a shrug? Or do you think we're headed towards something where there can be a coming together of maybe the younger people who might know him this way and be involved with some of these other content creator type golf channels, golf creators, and that, hey, this weekend they're playing here, it's a big tournament, tune in, let's watch. What do you think happens?
Yeah. I think there will be a coming together. I think it'll come with time. We've seen the PGA Tour really embrace, content creators this season, specifically creating, what they call the Creator Council, bringing in some of those big YouTube stars and having them, play rounds or pro-ams prior to tournaments, stuff like that. We've even seen some of that stuff happen on the Golf Channel. Like they aired like a good special, a few months ago. They aired one of those pro-ams prior to the players. So there are things that are, kind of melding those worlds together. And I think when you look at golf overall and how the sport has grown so much from a participatory standpoint, especially among young people, I think I think the PGA Tour specifically is setting themselves up very well to capture that audience. They might not have seen those returns quite yet. They're going to have to figure out how to make, those tournament platforms a bit more accessible to a younger audience that, isn't subscribed to cable or YouTube TV or whatnot. But I think there's a lot of untapped potential there. And I think eventually the tour will figure it out and find a way to capture those fans.
Ben, what do you think? Because I wrote this thing like a year ago where I said like Dude Perfect basically predicted like the way that YouTube and sports YouTube creators were going to go. And my whole thing there was like, it literally, like, it's funny if you go check like whether it's Pardon My Take or the Levitard Show or anything, everybody has like at least a half dozen golf videos up now. But it's no like big secret why. It looks cool. It's loose. Everybody can do it. Like it's almost a no-brainer why this stuff clicks. And then yet all anyone can ever talk about with golf is younger audience, boring sport, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, hold on. Which is it? You know what I mean? What do you think?
Yeah, it's funny. You said Dude Perfect, and I was probably going to show my age here, being about 10 years older than you guys, because my reference was going to be Happy Gilmore. Like, this just seems to be the ongoing push and pull of golf is like, we want more personality. How do we get more personality? And now it's just kind of evolved technologically.
So is Happy Gilmore 2 the answer? Is that where you're headed?
Well, yeah, maybe that's finally where we find that like happy medium this summer with Travis Kelce and all the cameos we're going to get there. I think like, yeah, all of that makes sense. And that's how like people even my age, I know, consume golf is through Good and all those sorts of platforms. I do think like one thing we've overlooked in this conversation is like the live golf aspect of this, because Bryson is a live guy. And I know like nobody really cares about that in terms of like Saudi Arabia and all that, but it does kind of limit a guy like Bryson to just the majors in terms of his presence on the tour. I mean, that's my hometown has the Master or the Memorial Tournament in Dublin, Ohio, and live guys can't play in the Memorial, and it's considered like the fifth major. So like we get these guys 4 times a year, and then we're not watching them other than on these platforms. So I do think I don't know if it's still the elephant in the room, but I do think like they need to find a way to bridge that gap, because outside of Rory and Scotty, like all the biggest names are still on Live. And like, it's a sport that's going to be driven by personality. And so I think at least in terms of Bryson, because Bryson seems to be the guy who's at the forefront of a lot of this YouTube stuff. I think like that's where we're not getting that connection here.
Yeah, I'll push back a little bit on that, Ben. When you say all the biggest guys are on Live now, I think that's pretty misguided. Bryson, I would say, is probably the only guy that has gone over to Live and actually raised his profile, right? And that's because he clearly, he's got more time to do the YouTube thing, and he's going all in on social media. The rest of those guys have kind of faded into obscurity. Let's talk about, John Rahm or Brooks Koepka, who haven't really done anything on a big stage since going over to Live. Cam Smith, who won the 2022 Open, was one of golf's next big stars. He hasn't done anything. I mean, they've gotten a lot of those. Yeah, Dustin Johnson. These guys used to be bona fide stars on the PGA Tour, and now are just kind of toiling in obscurity over there. What I think might change that, I think a lot of people are pretty bearish on any merger or reunification talks right now, but a lot of these guys' Live contracts are coming up within the next year or two. And that gives an opening for the PGA Tour, outside of a reunification structure, to kind of poach some of these guys back. Brooks Koepka is one of those guys who is, not so publicly kind of said that he wants back in on the PGA Tour. So, if the PGA Tour is able to kind of win some of those guys back over, I think that could be a death knell to Live, and also raise the profile of the tour even more in terms of star power.
Yeah, I didn't even necessarily mean in terms of performance, because I can't speak to that necessarily. But like, if you were to ask me,
what the hell is your hat for then, Ben?
I told you, my mother-in-law. But if you were to ask me to name 10 golfers, like, I think like 8 of them would be Live guys, or like six of them at least would be Live guys. Like that's, and so I do think just in like golf, that's something that golf has always had, is that even when guys kind of fade into obscurity, they still care in terms of their performance. They don't fade into obscurity because they still have name recognition. Like if you were watching the Memorial and like Dustin Johnson was in the lead for the Memorial, like there would be kind of a little bit more buzz about him than, so, some random guy on the tour who's not Rory or Scotty Scheffler. So I just think there is some sort of star power lacking, even though they have like a ton of stars, as many stars as they've ever had post Tiger.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The Live thing it reminds me a little bit of, I know they don't actually go overseas in the same way that, some of the soccer stars who went to, Middle East money chased it did, but it was such an obnoxious conversation that was so like think PC at the time that it was really starting to happen, when in reality it's just like, it sucks because we can't watch these people. That's really ended up boiling down to that. It's like, I don't know what the hell half of the soccer stars in the world are doing, because not half, but because I don't even know where to watch their game, that literally. And I know Live's not quite that bad, like I said, but you're
not watching the Saudi League on FS2?
No.
It's on FS2? That's cool. Now I know. All right, let's get into it. Speaking of where we watch things, UFC and ESPN entering the great unknown. Their exclusive negotiating window is over as of Tuesday morning. We're recording this Tuesday afternoon. And no deal, obviously. And I don't think that's a massive surprise, given that we expected UFC to explore the market, maybe bring in multiple partners, and we've touched base on this here on the podcast before as this negotiation has gone along. But before Ben wrote about handicapping these sort of landing places, the favorites all the way through the rumbles of the world, who got a nice mention there at the end from Ben. So we'll get to that. But
that was sarcastic for the record.
Okay, well, you never know. If Barstool's not staying there, I don't know how many candidates they're really going to have. But my question for you, Ben, before we even jump into that is, what do you think really changes here based on what these landing places and what we're talking about, aside from how much money UFC gets, like, duh. But, from a consumption standpoint, like if I'm just watching a pay-per-view on a Saturday and I want to see this card because it has a fighter I care about, or I'm just a big, huge fight fan, like what even is going to be different for people depending on any of these places, big picture?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a super fascinating story. I think these negotiations and however they take shape, it's just however it works out is going to be fascinating. And there are so many different layers to it. In terms of your question, like what would change? So
and just to clarify, I ask it because they produce their own content, right? Like Joe Rogan's going to be on no matter where it happens. And everything we kind of consume for the most part is probably going to feel similar. So I didn't say that, but that's why I'm asking.
Yeah. So the biggest thing you should be looking for is where do the pay-per-views land? Because you have the UFC rights and they have the pay-per-views, which is like probably what you think of when you think of UFC, but they also have, UFC fight nights, which are their lesser cards. And then their Dana White's Contender Series, which is kind of how they build up younger fighters and, get them wins and get them records and stuff. But the biggest thing you probably care about is the pay-per-views. And so what would change there is if they stay on ESPN, presumably nothing would really change. Presumably, other than it would just be on the flagship app as opposed to ESPN Plus, or probably both. And you would still have to pay $80 a pay-per-view to get that card. If they move to Netflix, now we don't know this for sure, but all indications are Netflix isn't interested in a pay-per-view model. Netflix just wants to buy out the rights to the pay-per-view. So if this thing lands on Netflix, maybe your Netflix subscription will go up, but it's just going to be the cost of your Netflix subscription. You'll have a Netflix subscription, and then it will be behind the Netflix paywall. The way it's structured now, which I frankly think is kind of bullshit, is like you have to have an ESPN subscription, and then you have to pay for the pay-per-view on top of the subscription.
An ESPN Plus subscription.
Correct. Yeah. And so you're basically they're double charging you for it. One's like a $8.
You're paying for the right to pay them more money. Correct.
So that's like, to me, is the most fascinating thing here, because TKO's other company, WWE, they've sold out their pay-per-views. They sold them to Peacock. And Peacock, you order Peacock, you have a Peacock subscription. You can watch any WWE pay-per-view for the price of that subscription. UFC on ESPN, you have to pay for the pay-per-view.
And to clarify, WWE overseas in a lot of countries has it on Netflix with the same model, correct?
Netflix has everything WWE overseas. If it's not in the United States, everything's on Netflix there.
So that's lending a little bit of credence to the idea you were talking about, where the UFC could fold itself in the same way.
I mean, if they do it, if they didn't charge us,
same parent company.
If they didn't charge us for Tyson Paul, like I don't think they're going to be paying us for UFC pay-per-views.
What do you think, Drew?
Well, the way Ben breaks it down kind of makes sense. There's some reporting from John Oran last night about how, I think we've all known that, it's likely that UFC is going to split into multiple packages on multiple different rights partners for a while. John actually suggested that it might be more than two, right? So it could be 3 or 4. And the way Ben broke it down kind of makes me think, all right, pay-per-views might be Netflix or Amazon, one of the big tech companies who are apparently interested in acquiring those rights. I'm sorry. Did I drop out?
You're still audio here.
You're frozen.
There you go.
My bad. So I think the pay-per-view aspect on Netflix or Amazon would make a lot of sense. But then when you look at fight nights, that might be a package for ESPN or ESPN Plus. And then going down to the Contender Series, I think maybe, a Scripps or a Next Star on CW or Ion would make a lot of sense if those are up and comers, kind of just trying to get the most reach out there. That type of package would make a lot of sense for one of those smaller broadcast channels like the CW. Dana White's been pretty clear that they want a big payday from this. The way to do that is to, secure more rights partners.
Well, and that's TKO, UFC's parent company. Their history with WWE would indicate that's what they're going to do, because WWE's rights in the United States are on Peacock, they're on Netflix, they're on the CW, they're on Comcast through the USA Network and NBC with quarterly specials. Like, they're just spread all over the place. And so I would imagine that's the approach they're going to take here. The difference is, and this is another part of it, I just find this endlessly fascinating, is WWE, all of their content is relatively the same in terms of stature. Like, it's like, yeah, you have the pay-per-views, you have Monday Night Raw, but like all of it is kind of must-watch programming if you're a WWE fan. UFC is really just the pay-per-views in terms of like what the most people are watching. And it's like they do
Yeah,
good
that's what I was wondering. Who's gonna want the stuff that, if it's tiered like that the way Drew, it's like, what's that even worth? And what network is gonna be like, please let us have that? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much of an audience they draw. Like, genuinely, I'm sure those numbers are out there, but that's what I've always wondered is like you're saying, what it's almost like, I don't know, when you hear about how like the NBA finals or the NBA package, like ESPN looks at it as, we're getting the finals and the playoffs, maybe some of those Saturday and Sunday games, but like TNT getting the All-Star game, like it almost isn't even a dollar figure in any of these contracts. It feels like this would be the same. Like, these are almost negligible to the networks.
Yeah, and that's what I wonder about ESPN, because I think what Drew laid out makes sense. Like, it just makes too much sense for UFC to do something with Netflix. Like, TKO is so married to Netflix through WWE and its upcoming boxing promotion that you just have to figure like that's where the pay-per-views are going to land, because I can't imagine Netflix being interested in any other part of the package. But then if you're ESPN, like, you're going to go from having the pay-per-views to having fight nights. Like, maybe that is something you want to do to fill out your offerings on flagship, or to just, fill out the void you have in your calendar without baseball or whatever. But like, that's a pretty big drop off in terms of stature if you're ESPN. And then, yeah, I mean, Contender Series does make sense for like a linear partner. Now that Drew mentions it, like the CW makes a lot of sense because there's a pre-existing relationship there, and you can kind of check off the box of being on network television. And
for them, the difference between a rerun of some show nobody cares about versus actual live something sports related actually does matter. And they've proven that with Mountain West Football or NWSL. Or if you can get 300,000 people versus 40, like that actually, it's significant for those types of places.
Yeah. So their current deal, or the deal they signed in 2019 with ESPN, was 5 years for a total of $1.5 billion. And I know the goal for this deal is to either double that or get to $1 billion annually. I just wonder, and I think the demand is there to make that happen. It's almost like they don't have the supply. Like, it's almost like they need to, I don't know if it's do 2 pay-per-views a month or just create something that's closer to pay-per-view than the current drop-off they have between pay-per-view and fight night. And endlessly fascinating. I cannot wait to see how this shakes out.
Well, so I guess I have a big picture question, but I don't want to get there yet. Ben, you've put out there that, like, as we've talked about this in the past, and I know you wrote it in your article, like that ESPN needs UFC as well, and vice versa. I get ESPN in the past that they've definitely, it's helped them grow ESPN Plus a lot. I think just having a must-see popular sports property, period, is better than not, like, duh. But honestly, the inverse of that is the part that I'm maybe more interested in, because, like, I think you've made the case to me in the past where, hey, it'll pop up on First Take, it might get a little bit of airtime here and there. Dana White's on McAfee, which maybe he would be on McAfee either way because McAfee does his own thing. But whatever it is, like that, there's just it exists on ESPN, which has some kind of bottom line value, as MLB is yelling about, right? But I don't know if that's like, is that still true with how much cultural relevance that this sport kind of has now, where you got Joe Rogan doing companion podcasts. You got, like I just said, McAfee kind of follows the sport pretty closely. I don't know if it needs ESPN. Like, I don't know if it cares. If it's on Netflix, I think people will watch.
I think that's what this all comes down to. That's the question that UFC is going to have to ask itself, is like, the way we talk this out, I think it comes down to a decision of, are we going to put our pay-per-views on Netflix or are we going to keep them on ESPN? And the question UFC is going to have to ask itself is, are we comfortable moving away from ESPN and losing that exposure that we've enjoyed for the last 5 years? However minimal it might be, it has, I think, undoubtedly grown the sport, inarguably. And so I think that that's what it will have to ask itself. And I think you're right, ultimately, Brendon. Like, I think that they have kind of moved past that point. I think even the cross promotion that they do with WWE, now that they're owned by the same parent company, like, they are out there. They are in this, like, this ecosystem of sports now, and they're going to be relevant no matter what. But I understand the appeal of still wanting to be on ESPN, still having that partnership, and still getting that promotion on a monthly basis that they get.
Here's the thing, though, Ben. When we're talking about the pay-per-views specifically, I mean, those are tucked away on ESPN Plus, behind a separate, much more expensive paywall on that app. Wouldn't more exposure, more reach for that package actually be Netflix? Where if what you're saying is accurate, you're going to get that as part of your Netflix subscription. Already the biggest streaming service in the world. I feel like that, if you're looking for more reach, makes a lot of sense. And then when you're talking about the ESPN part of it, the only linear exposure, aside from, maybe a one-off segment on First Take or McAfee or whatever, is those kind of smaller prelim fights before the main cards, right? If I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can keep some sort of deal with ESPN where they have a slice of that linear package, maybe some of the prelims. You give them some of the fight nights for their future flagship service. And that's enough to kind of benefit from that ESPN platform. But in reality, you're putting your best product on a platform, which is Netflix or maybe Amazon, that is actually much more accessible to the average fight fan.
Yeah, and I think that is where TKO's pre-existing relationship with Netflix looms large over all of this, because they already have a 4-month head start on knowing what it's like to be on Netflix and knowing the type of exposure that can generate. And I know, like, Netflix numbers get really weird and the streamers don't like putting their numbers out there, but, like, if anybody's going to have an idea of what it's like to be on Netflix already, it's WWE. So yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying makes all the sense in the world. And I think we've done a great job laying out this episode, because what I'm about, like, I think it's easier said than done, though, to cut that cord, no pun intended, of linear television and to say, okay, we're just disappearing from linear television altogether, aside from our smaller shows or contender series. But, like, that's the way all this is going, right?
Yeah, and I just feel like fight fans have the habit of chasing and paying for whatever, even if it's pro wrestling or it's MMA. Like, I just think people are used to that. So I don't know if it's as big of a risk, but my question would just be too, like, do we know the cut that UFC gets of, like, pay-per-view revenue on a deal like how does that work? Because I would think they would want a pretty hefty amount of money from Netflix for this if they're not going to be getting the extra monthly revenue or however, annual revenue from people buying the pay-per-view every weekend or, whenever they do.
So as I understand it, like, they don't get any revenue out of their pay-per-views. Like, they have effectively just leased them to ESPN. And so the question would be, so if that's worth $1.5 billion over 5 years in 2019, what is that worth now? Probably close to double. Like, yeah, like, if probably $1 billion a year. I mean, it's kind of interesting because then you don't have the same motivation to put on killer fights. And I actually think that's something the ESPN deal has suffered from, is they really, like, you've gotten 3 Conor McGregor fights and 3 John Jones fights over the course of 5 years. Like, it's not great. And so I think UFC is probably hurting more for young stars than golf is at this point. But that's what they'll have to figure out.
You know how many UFC stars I can name? Less than golf stars. I'll tell you that.
Same. And
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay,
well,
so that could go ahead, Drew.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. I mean, Netflix spends in the neighborhood of $18 billion a year on content. So, I mean, while $1 billion a year isn't, like, just a drop in the bucket, That's probably, I don't know ESPN's number off the top of my head, but that's definitely more than what ESPN spends every year on content. So, if you think about it this way, I think Netflix makes a lot of sense that they could afford, to pay that much to UFC.
And they've proven, I think, like Drew, you were on when we talked about the WWE debut. And I think one thing I've been impressed by on their part, if I was Dana White or somebody in his shoes, is they've proven they can market and pull people toward a premier thing on their platform, right? Like there's a WWE row all the time now. It's there. And I'm just going to see that if I'm on Netflix. Even if I don't care, I'm going to be reminded that it exists. If I do care, it's going to be easy for me to get to it. You're not going to have the where the hell is Thursday Night Football thing we had 7 years ago or whatever when Amazon took it over, or I guess not 7, but that was maybe originally when they first started it was that long ago. I don't know. I'm losing track.
Yeah,
but
the simulcast I think was probably around there.
Yeah, so you're not going to have that. Here's my last question on this, and we'll get to a very similar topic, I think, in the big picture in a minute. But I think most people would agree that when you talk about just the value to ESPN and where UFC kind of sat, that when you look at ESPN Plus's growth, when you look at, cultural relevance, popularity, things that are a little difficult to measure, as we'll get to, like I said, in just 1 second, I would say, and I think most would agree, UFC was probably undervalued by the end of at least the past couple years of this deal. They're not getting, as they're about to prove by getting more. If they do 5-6 years here, where do we think this ends up? Like, is this kind of a blip where it's happening to go to market at the peak of its popularity? I know you're saying, Ben, there's not like the big premier names on the cards and everything, but I think it's talked about, it's cared about more than I can ever remember. Is it going to be like that 5-6 years from now? Like, if you're a network looking at this, are you saying we're buying high? What do you think?
I don't know. Is President Stephen A. Smith going to be at every pay-per-view the way our current president is?
Well, that's exactly really what I'm asking you. I mean, yeah. You're getting right to it, right? Like between Joe Rogan and Dave Portnoy and Donald Trump and freaking Shaq, I guess now, like this thing matters. Is it going to still in the same way in a little while?
I think so. I think the way they just eventize their product is just so perfect for like this current era that we're in. And that's why Netflix is such an obvious fit, because Netflix like events. Like Netflix doesn't want to air Contender Series. They don't want to air Fight Night. They want to air a monthly pay-per-view that everybody can rally around and watch. And so I think other than the state of the economy and maybe the lack of star power, like I just can't think of a better time for UFC to be going to market. Like not only this is the last media rights available, right? Until baseball's full package.
Baseball in a couple of years.
Yeah, baseball and NHL, I think, are both up in 2028. So like this is it for like the next couple of years. And so just the way the market has set up for them, it couldn't be better. Like they couldn't be asking for a better market to be going into in terms of Netflix, ESPN about to launch its own streaming service, Warner Brothers Discovery having like all this leftover NBA money that I don't even think they were going to have when their rights fees kicked in. So to answer your question though, like, yes, I don't think I know what you're getting at in terms of like the political nature of all of this, but I do think it's bigger than that. I think it's just about like what streaming services are looking for. And so if we do get to 5 years, and what's funny about all this too is when ESPN signed this deal in 2019, it seemed like a massive overpay. It was like, what? I went and bought WWE stock the very next day because I was like, if this is what UFC is getting, just imagine what WWE is going to get in a couple of years. And so I just think that like this, if there is in 5 years, if we look back and we're like, man, that's an overpay, it's going to have way more to do with the state of the industry and the streaming bubble having burst. If that's what happens, then it's going to be like, oh, Trump went out of office and UFC stopped mattering.
Yeah. If you look at just fundamentally, you could honestly call this like the fundamental law of sports media rights. It's like the price only goes up, right? There are so few examples of leagues and live sports properties that actually have to cut their media rights fees. Like maybe baseball after this ESPN opt out, like that might be the list. Generally speaking, like this is the most valuable programming that exists in our society at this point.
Well, then
right?
maybe the rule would be, maybe the way to answer no to my original question is if it doesn't increase and just flatlines. I don't think it would go down, but that could be maybe the way to look at it. Or even like the NCAA championship deal that just got done at ESPN. I think people were like, that didn't go up enough. It went up, but not enough. Like maybe it's probably never gonna crash, but that might be the thing for it. Yeah.
Kind of leads into our next topic.
It does. So finally, let's check in on where we watch sports, because whether it's UFC, whether it is Bryson's talk show on YouTube or actual live sporting events, everything is, I think, blurring and blending. And there was a long story that I've had bookmarked for a while by Alex Weprin at The Hollywood Reporter on the end of TV. And in his case, actually, because he works for The Hollywood Reporter and not Awful Announcing, was anchored to the Oscars and the fact that the Oscars for the first time were available on Hulu. But you could make a similar case and do the article based around Fox putting the Super Bowl on Tubi, right? Like, his point was every major sporting event and award show, all the things that are on that big list of top 100 broadcasts that we all pore over and get intrigued by each year, they're all on streaming now. Every single one. There's nothing that's only available on my TV. And his point was more of a businessy angle because that's who their audience is. But I was curious, like, more to talk to you guys about what it means for how we measure viewership, because I was thinking about it really more even than like Fox and Tubi and the Super Bowl, of the NBA conversation that we all have had all season long, and that league's efforts to turn interest and attention into money and into things that actually, like, sports leagues are stood up on, not just YouTube clicks or people talking about it in a middle school or whatever. And I just think it's going to get harder and harder. I think that it's going to be pretty impossible with something being on a platform that won't tell us exact numbers, or split up among a bunch of different places, or whatever. It just feels like the way we kind of look at what's popular, what's up, what's down, what's growth look like, any of this stuff, like I'm pretty lost as to what it's going to be in 5 or so years that we really look at to make definitive statements, whereas it's been pretty straightforward up until maybe the past 5 years. What do you think, Drew?
It's going to be the media rights deals, right? Like that's going to be the starting point, because we might not know the data, the viewership measurements, but the companies that are airing these live properties are certainly going to have that data, and they'll be able to make decisions based on it, whether or not they should pay for an increase for UFC or the NBA and whatnot. I'm not sure actually that it might hurt people like us who like to discuss the popularity of a sport 10 times a year, that we don't have actual data points to fall back on. But in terms of the business and the measurement side, I'm not sure if that's actually the right way to look at this. We'll just have fewer data points, I suppose, because it'll just come down to how much companies are paying for these properties.
Well, I do think it's there. I'm sure people are paid to do this, and some companies are very smart about it. They do know how to monetize some of these metrics differently than Nielsen viewers or, whatever. But I don't know if everyone is caught up to that. You know what I mean? I think there might be some very smart people in these leagues and networks who know this, but I think, to me, one of the ways where it might affect the average person is, like, I don't know, pick a story from last year. The Olympics, I think, is actually a perfect example, where we all had a general idea that was hitting harder than previous Olympics, even pre-COVID Olympics. but I couldn't tell you, look at this as a reason for why. I know the NBC nightcap primetime thing was up, so there you go. There's one, but it just kind of felt like it mattered. And I guess when I think about, like, what does a talk show talk about? What does a podcast talk about? Where do advertisers put their money? Like, what, if I'm a influencer or a celebrity, where do I want to show up? Like, it's a little bit weird to try to pinpoint that right now, Ben. I think it's like we were just talking about with UFC. Aiden Ross shows up, but it's like, is it just because Trump's there and kind of seems like the right thing to do? Or does he have a management team saying this many people will see you? I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny. This is going to surprise you guys. I follow this through the prism of pro wrestling, and the pro wrestling content that I consume is very business based. It's actually like the nerdiest way to consume something that's already inevitably nerdy. But so every week they would do their ratings reports, and it's, Raw did 1.5 million and the demo was 1.25, whatever. Well, now Raw's on Netflix, and Netflix, you don't get the data until a week after the show. And that's only if it's in the top 10. And it's like some fuzzy math, and it takes into account how many people watched it live, but also how many people watched it afterwards, and however they do the math. And then AEW, which is on TBS, they also are simulcast on Max now. And so they've seen a significant drop in their ratings, their linear ratings, which can be explained, though, by you have X amount of people watching it on Max, but we don't know how many people are watching it on Max. Are the numbers going down, or are they going up? Like, we don't even know that. And so it's like, I think on the one hand, like, it's just like we have to adjust our data points and like what we pay attention to as opposed to traditional linear ratings. But on the other, to get what you're getting at with Shaq and Aiden Ross, like, now you can kind of just make the argument for anything you want to make the argument for. Like, you can just point to social media followers or Instagram impressions or what, like, when you don't have like a set agreed upon method for measuring any of this stuff, then you're just kind of left to make arguments in whatever direction you want to make. And so I think that's going to be the frustrating part. But to Drew's point, like, all we know in the end are these media rights deals. And that's ultimately, right, that's the point of these ratings, is what does it get you to in your next media rights deal, and so on and so forth.
But I think about, like, those are long, right? Like, and I think about, like, soccer, right? I think today is there Champions League today, or there was last week. It's on Paramount Plus. Frankly, I don't think people watch it. I don't know, but like, I feel like that is a big missed opportunity. And I know all of Europe is tuned in, so they could probably mostly care less about the CBS Paramount deal. But I don't know anybody who has Paramount Plus. I don't know people who could even tell me where to watch that, if they're even casual soccer fans. I'm not sure if people even know. Maybe I'm overstating that a little bit, but I look at the Apple MLS deal. We have this very similar conversation about that deal all the time, where it's like, great, they got their money, but is it working? Like, did that actually accomplish what they wanted? And yeah, maybe by the next media rights deal, we'll sort of get to see how the market responds to all that uncertainty. And maybe MLS can like escape the black box that they've been living in for however long by that point. And the Max thing too, like, they have told us they're going to start charging for that BR Sports tier like 5 times. And I thought it was March 30th was the cold hard date. I still don't get charged for it. I still can go on there and watch, even though my tier on Max is not supposed to be able to do that. I'm just kind of waiting. And that tells me that it's not going so well for them. So maybe we're just in this moment where it's a little inscrutable, and then eventually it'll kind of flatline out. But I do think, like, Drew, in this moment, it's pretty fascinating to try to put your, lick your finger, put it in the air, and feel where the wind's blowing. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for us, right? Because we're not inside these companies, and we don't have access to all the data and the numbers that they do. But for the actual decision makers here, I think actually they're going to have more data points than ever, right? With Nielsen, with linear television measurements, it's honestly more art than science, right? They've gotten more accurate over the years, but it's still a sample of people that they are measuring to get these ratings. When you're talking about a streaming service, you can have it down to exactly how many people are watching something, right? So you're going to have way more accurate numbers to go off of. Whether or not, the leagues will have access to this, that might be a different story. I'm not sure how that works internally. Like if you're, MLB, do you get numbers from Roku? Like how many people are watching their baseball games every week? Probably, but I don't know. Like Roku could be, just sending them the more favorable stuff.
And the different services might be a little bit different in terms of how they handle that, right?
Exactly.
How much data do they have the technological capacity to collect versus others? I'm sure YouTube's awesome at it, but Roku maybe less.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be as big of a deal as we're making it out to be right now. I think kind of the bigger picture that I took away from this article was kind of the change in, the traditional, and I know we've talked about it ad nauseum, but the traditional pay TV ecosystem, right? With Fox and ESPN finally going direct to consumer, there's a big question about, what is the value proposition of a cable or satellite subscription? Because now you can get literally every piece of live sports programming that you would ever want through a direct to consumer streaming service, right? Barring, a few RSNs or whatever. So, we're really getting to a point now. What is the end here for pay television? Is there going to be a floor of people that are going to stay subscribed to those types of services? Because really it comes down to ease of use, right? You don't have to sign up for
and right now it's
different
cheaper
services. Exactly.
It's still cheaper to just have YouTube TV than to compile all these random things still.
Yeah. So, and you're probably going to see Fox and ESPN kind of come into the market at a pretty high price point, something that, you're really only targeting people that might not already have a pay TV subscription, that might only want ESPN or Fox programming. So we're still at like a middle ground where like companies are still trying to preserve that golden goose that is the pay TV bundle, but they're preparing for the future with their streaming services.
I'm just surprised we got to this point without any, not company consolidation, but at least bundling. I mean, I just like Venue made sense to me from that standpoint, even though, even that was a little weird because it's like, well, it's still not quite all the sports and the price point was going to be pretty high. And obviously it fizzled because of the antitrust lawsuit, but it at least made sense to me because if I was a company, if I was a network, a distributor, I would be trying to avoid having to get something off the ground myself and also flash a price point to people that might be off-putting and kind of piss people off. You know what I mean? Like if you're ESPN, you can at least advertise that you're a standalone sports distributor and people can only have you and be pretty satisfied. That might be a stretch, but that's at least a case you could make. All of the college football playoff, all of the NBA finals, on and on. But if I'm Fox, like, hey, the World Series, some football and racing, pay us $30, and people are just going to say no. You know what I mean? And then there's a little, I don't know. I don't know how to, as I've said multiple times, I'm just some dude on a podcast, but like, to me, that feels like it would have a little bit of brand hit to just turn people off like that. So I'm surprised we didn't just see companies say, you know what, we're going in with this company. It might not be as potentially ceiling lucrative, but let's just do it so that we can kind of get quicker toward where this is already headed. And now they all are going to start alone and eventually consolidate.
Well, I think you're getting to the point, right? So you mentioned Venue, which ran into antitrust, barriers. I think the whole point of Fox, launching their own direct-to-consumer service is that we've already seen that the federal government has been fine with established services, kind of bundling their stuff together. And so Fox is really just launching this so they can be an arms dealer to ESPN or to Netflix or to whoever might want to license their content on a much bigger service. Fox is not launching their direct-to-consumer service as a standalone venture that they think is actually going to make money, no matter what Lachlan Murdoch says in an earnings call. This is so that they can join up with other media, more established platforms.
I'm just surprised we haven't seen it sooner. We've been talking about this for like since streaming really exploded, and we still haven't really seen a single big domino fall where somebody is even licensing the whole library of another major company, let alone an actual bundling or acquisition of a smaller property or anything. We're just still in this lurch where you can pay $8 a month for these 20 different things if you want to. Eight's on the low end, obviously, and you just kind of have to figure it out for yourself. Like I think people are obviously sick of it, so I think we all hope it changes, but I don't know. All right, let's get to our hot mics. Something that caught each of our eye that we liked, we disliked, maybe we just want to talk about a little bit more. Ben, why don't you start us off?
I'm going to go back to pro wrestling. It is officially WrestleMania week. I'll be in Las Vegas this weekend for the festivities at Allegiant Stadium. Super pumped. Always good to spend some time in Vegas. And but I'm actually, I've been underwhelmed by the build to WrestleMania, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think the biggest is just, Brendon, it was about a month ago I made you talk to me about John Cena turning heel. And a big part of that was The Rock's role in John Cena turning heel. I don't know if you guys know this. The Rock has just totally disappeared from WWE since then. He hasn't been on TV once. They haven't referenced it in the build to the John Cena versus Cody Rhodes match. Like, I don't know if something changed with his plans. I don't know if there's a twist coming and it's all going to make sense, whether it's retrofitted or not. But The Rock has just like totally disappeared. The storytelling for it is totally nonsensical because he was the catalyst for John Cena turning heel, which was like considered one of the biggest moments in pro wrestling history. And now it's just like, it's an afterthought almost. Like it's of the, there's a Saturday show and a Sunday show. I think people are looking a lot more forward to the Saturday night main event between Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and CM Punk than they are the Sunday show, which has John Cena versus Cody Rhodes. So I'm just kind of baffled by it. I wish I knew what happened. Hopefully we find out here soon. Maybe I'll write about it at some point, but yeah, just kind of a bizarre twist here in the road to WrestleMania.
Stephen A's vice president? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
that could be out there.
That feels like it's flipped. Feels like it should be the other way around.
It is. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, is it typical that is it just because it's The Rock that nobody has been able to find the answer to what happened? Like if it was a regular star, they probably would be reporting on oh, they're occupied or they're on the outs with management or something, right?
Well, when he showed up for the show where John Cena turned heel or for that 2-week storyline, it came out of left field. Like at that point, everybody had kind of just accepted okay, this year is going to be a WrestleMania without The Rock. And I think he had just been announced for a Martin Scorsese movie. So everybody figured, hey, he's busy. He's definitely not going to be doing anything physical. This will just be a year without The Rock. That's fine. But then he comes in, creates one of the biggest moments in pro wrestling history, and then just disappears. It's I would have said 2 weeks ago, well, at least he'll be at WrestleMania. Now I'm not even sure if he's going to be at the show or not. It's really bizarre.
Interesting. All right. Speaking of shows, I'll go next. This was from Ryan Glasspiegel on X, and Pat McAfee had his big night out event, the first of what appears like it could be a recurring thing for McAfee and co. It was in Pittsburgh. He sold out the arena, sold the on-demand video rights to Hulu, brought a bunch of celebrities, maybe lowercase c celebrities to the event. It seemed pretty cool, though. 4 hours, gave away a bunch of money. I mean, if you're a McAfee fan, especially doing it in his hometown, I feel like it was pretty cool. But the question from Glasspiegel, who is from Front Office Sports, was how many sports media personalities could fill an arena for a live show like Pat McAfee did in Pittsburgh tonight? And so we're going to answer that question right now. So Glasspiegel said Portnoy. Do we agree with that? I was a little skeptical that would be the first off the top of his head answer. Maybe if you just said Barstool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pardon my take would have been my first.
That was where my head went. I want to see if I can actually pull up my tweet. But who else do you guys think of that could really?
Could Stephen A. do it? do you think Stephen A could sell out an arena?
I don't think there are Stephen A fans. Like, I think there are Stephen A fans, but I don't think he has a fan base that like would want to purchase tickets and see him at a show. Like, that's just not his that's not like how he is as a performer, really. He's not like that sort of showman. Bill Simmons has been doing theaters.
Yeah.
Maybe if you did a Bill Simmons variety show in Boston, and you promised like Larry Bird and Tom Brady.
I had Bill Simmons as a maybe. I think that Shannon Sharp and Chad Johnson could probably do it because they do theaters. They've done a tour the past year and they're doing another one this year. And I believe that they've sold theaters out too. If you really pumped it up and had the right circumstance, because the other thing is like Pat McAfee didn't exactly announce all the guests, but if you pay attention, you had an idea of who you might see, right? Like Jelly Roll was there. Shane Gillis was there. Some of these
there was also the
exactly...
Aaron Rodgers subplot. A lot of people thought Aaron Rodgers was going to announce he's joining the Steelers there.
Yeah. So I think Shannon Sharp and Chad Johnson, these are all, I think if you asked if Pat McAfee could have done it, people might have been a little skeptical. So here we go.
That's fair.
But I had pardon my take. Simmons, and then I had Mason Cameron. I think they could probably do it. And I don't know if we count them, but they do a sports talk show. So technically speaking, even if they didn't play music, they probably could get enough people out there. They could get 15,000 people out there in Las Vegas or something if they really
you got to throw Rogan in there too.
Yeah.
Sure. Rogan easily could do that.
He's done it many times.
He's an honorary sports media member. Right? Yeah. You include him when you want to make a point like that. That's always my thing with Rogan. If you want to throw him in for that exact type of thing, you can. Otherwise, he never comes up. But are we missing anybody else?
I don't think so. I think pardon my take for sure. And so,
I mean, the Kelseys,
yeah,
but that doesn't really count. That's NFL players. If we're being straight about it,
And let's not pretend that McAfee sold out the arena. Yeah, I believe the capacity was about 17,000, and he sold 12,000, or there's a 12,000 person attendance. So not quite a sellout.
It was showing sold out on Ticketmaster when I checked because I wanted to make sure, but there might have been some tarping of seats, maybe nothing behind the stage. You could get creative.
I have some insight into this. This may shock you. It was a WWE production, and
yes, it was.
That's a WWE trick. Is there will be seats available when there need to be seats available. Yeah, but it was technically sold out.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Good to know.
Huh. Yeah. If we're going non-active athletes, I think we got to the list. I don't know if there's anybody else. It's pretty impressive. And he seems to really believe in this whole idea. I feel like he actually wants to do it more. And if being first and actually having the money and the WWE connection to try something like this kind of makes me feel like he could continue to pull it off and actually make it a thing. Because people are going to want to show up if it's an easy 20. You're a musician. You go do 1 song, 2 songs, hang out, green room's nice, whatever. He probably flies you out. Maybe I don't know why you wouldn't say yes. And if you get enough of those types of people every time you do it, then that's a nice little show to pay $100 to go to.
There's no way McAfee made money off this, though, right? No way.
No, I think he has said his goal was to break even. I heard him talking about it a little bit on Tuesday's episode 2. But I thought it was interesting he sold the Hulu rights, so there's a little bit of money coming in on that. Maybe that becomes more of a thing over time if it's actually something people want to gravitate toward. But I don't know. Interesting experiment. Not a lot of people who could pull it off. What is your hot mic, Drew?
Wow. Very thrilling compared to those two topics. It's about RSNs. So cover your ears, Ben. To me right now, one of the most interesting stories in sports media is what's going on between Comcast, certain regional sports networks, and the Trump administration. About a few weeks ago now, Comcast and Yes Network came to an extension of their current agreement that essentially kicked the can down the road and kept Yes Network on Comcast's basic cable tiers until the end of baseball season. That's what the reporting out there will tell you. This is the first time that Comcast has reached any sort of kind of medium-term agreement with an RSN that hasn't bumped them up to the more expensive digital tiers on their cable packages. Pretty much every other, well, not pretty much, every single other RSN across the country has had to bend the knee to Comcast and move to the higher tier. Yes Network was able to do this because they got the Trump administration involved. They got the FCC chair, Brendon to essentially pressure Comcast into, keeping this deal at least for the foreseeable future until baseball season ends, so people can watch their Yankees games. Now, over in Chicago, Jerry Reinsdorf is trying the same playbook. So Chicago Sports Network was launched last year, has not struck a carriage agreement with Comcast since its launch. Reinsdorf was seen on social media meeting with Brendon last week, presumably to talk about this same thing, trying to get CHSN onto a basic tier on Comcast's cable platforms. Who knows if this will work, but it's going to really test Comcast's appetite to kind of, buck the Trump administration, because we've seen constantly since Trump became president, his, kind of flagrant attacks on legacy media. CBS and ABC. ABC settled a lawsuit. CBS is currently in $1 billion lawsuit with the Trump administration. The FCC chair has already opened up an inquiry into NBC News, which Comcast owns. Trump, during these Yes Network negotiations, actually posted on social media how he is not a fan of Comcast CEO Brian Roberts. This is clearly like that. There's a lot going on behind the scenes in Washington right now. That is trying
and
to
not so behind the scenes. It sounds
and not so behind the scenes. That is kind of pressuring these media companies to do certain things that the Trump administration finds favorable. Who knows why, they're getting involved with RSN specifically. That seems to be more like a back scratching move. Maybe, Jerry Reinsdorf is friends with some people in the Trump admin, but we've seen, for pretty much all of Trump's first term and second term, that kind of back scratching, those favors are a big part of how business is done in Washington when he's the president. So it'll be very interesting to see if Chicago Sports Network ends up on a Comcast system because of these types of dealings.
I think to tie your two together here, I have a guess that the way that this and any other similar negotiation goes will be similar to what happened to the federal probe into Vince McMahon. That would be my hypothesis, is that friends in high places tends to go a long way. Little WWE CHSN combination there to wrap us up here, tie that bow. Yeah, super interesting though. I mean, I do think it's not common that we get a sports tie-in, but for whatever reason, this has become a little pet issue of the administration.
Yeah.
All right, that'll wrap us up. Go ahead.
Sorry, real quick. The bigger picture here is will, other RSNs across the country try to do this, right? If Comcast keeps kind of agreeing to these deals that they don't want to agree to, does that open the door for other RSNs? So yeah, I'll leave it at that, but super interesting combination of politics, sports, business, everything that could really get the juices flowing for the play-by-play.
For the record, also much more important than who could fill an arena. I don't want you to feel bad about your hot mic there. My thing was stupid nonsense. This matters, so don't be too hard on yourself. But that will wrap us up for the week. Hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. We're here for you every single Wednesday. We're also at awfulannouncing.com covering this stuff minute to minute and across all social media platforms. Check us out wherever you are online, and we'll talk to you next week.